Welcome everyone to today's webinar on incorporating asset building strategies into neighborhood revitalization. We're going to go ahead and start on time since we have a lot of information to cover today. Good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are. My name is Rick Hoey. I'm the Director of Affordable Housing Initiatives at CFED. I will be joined shortly by my fellow panelists, and we'll make those introductions in a moment. Today's webinar is co-hosted by the Corporation for Enterprise Development and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And while it was initially envisioned specifically for Choice and Hope 6 neighborhoods, much of what we talk about today is actually relevant in a variety of housing programs. First, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items. If you're experiencing any trouble with the dial-in audio, you can also listen in through your speakers on your computer. Simply connect your speakers or a headset to your computer. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on both the CFED and the HUD website. In addition, we will email this PowerPoint to all attendees along with the follow-up survey to gather your thoughts and ideas. Finally, if you experience any technical issues during the webinar, please contact webinars@cfed.org and we will attempt to get you fully connected. All webinar attendees except the speakers will be muted today to ensure sound quality. So if you have a question, please type it in the questions box in your webinar control panel as shown on the slide. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. And we have a full schedule, so we hopefully will have 10 minutes or so at the end. So today's agenda will be as follows. First, Dina Lehman-Kim from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development will be filling in today for Ron Ashford, who had a last-minute conflict. Dina will give us an introduction and framing for the webinar. That will be followed by a presentation from Lee Tibble, CFED's Director of Savings and Financial Security, along with Michael Mira, the Executive Director of the Tacoma Housing Authority in Washington State, and myself on that section as well. We will end the webinar today with Mindy Turbov, Director of Choice Neighborhoods at HUD, giving some guidance on integrating asset building in Choice and Hope 6 neighborhoods, followed by our question and answer period. Again, as a reminder, please submit questions anytime throughout the presentation through the question box on your control panel. With that, I'd like to begin our webinar by handing the mic over to Dina, who will provide us an introduction and some framing for today's webinar. Dina, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. First, I wanted to thank everybody who's taken the time to join us today for this informative webinar. And I want to send also Ron Ashford's regrets. He really was looking forward to participating, but unfortunately couldn't. So basically, we just wanted to set the tone by providing a snapshot of public housing residents. We know that 71% of our residents are at or below extremely low income levels. Their average gross income is $13,427. We know that there are 1.2 million households in public housing, and an additional 2.2 million have housing choice vouchers. We do not have very good statistics at all on the number of these individuals who are unbanked, but we know that the number is high. And so we're very excited about the information that CFED is going to provide to us today. So with that, I will now turn it back over to CFED.
Thank you, Dina. Before we start our joint presentation, I'd like to give a brief overview of CFED, and Michael Mira will follow with a few words about the Tacoma Housing Authority. Some of you may already be familiar with CFED. We're a national nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to expand economic opportunity for low-income people. Part of what makes us unique is that we connect community practitioners, public policy, and private markets to advance asset-building opportunities, particularly for low and moderate-income families. For the past 7 years, CFED has led the Innovations in Manufactured Homes initiative with the goal of transforming manufactured housing into an appreciating asset. For the past 2 years or so, CFED has seen significant interest and growth in its Housing as a Platform for Asset Building program of work from affordable housing providers seeking a more holistic approach to housing. These groups see embedding asset building and financial education into housing programs as not only creating positive outcomes for participants in the broader community, but also for the housing providers themselves. Now, Michael Mira will say a few words about the Tacoma Housing Authority. Go ahead, Michael.
Tacoma Housing Authority is a public housing authority in Tacoma, Washington, about 30 miles south of Seattle. We are a mid to large size housing authority serving about 5,500 households. 4,000 of them are participants in our rental assistance program, the largest of which is our Housing Choice Voucher Program. The other are tenants of the Tacoma Housing Authority. We are Tacoma's largest landlord. THA is also a real estate developer, and for the past 10 years we've been preoccupied with a Hope 6 redevelopment of a community called Salishan, which had us tear down and rebuild about 200 urban acres. That was also the occasion for us to think about asset building in a focused way. THA is also a moving to work housing authority and a public development authority as well.
Thanks a lot, Michael. And if any of you have a chance to check out Michael's webpage, there's a lot of great information on Salishan and the great work they're doing out there. So our goal here today is to give you a broad brush sense of this field of asset building and how it relates and can assist with the various types of programs that you are all engaged with already, helping to stabilize and strengthen families. We'll give you a background on why assets matter and an overview of how assets are currently distributed in the U.S. We'll share highlights of some recent research on assets, and we'll walk you through a framework of financial security that you can use in your housing programs. So why are we talking about assets today? Because income alone does not create financial stability. Personal savings and other assets are what help individuals make it through harder times and also to make it up the economic ladder. One critically important way to do that is through systems and settings that families already intersect with, and where we live is perhaps the most fundamental of those. So what I'll be asking you to think about today is how the programs and policies we'll talk about can impact housing stakeholders and the families they serve, and how you might begin to get engaged in offering more asset building opportunities. Just to be clear, I'll start with the definition of assets. Most people would readily agree that assets include bank accounts, real estate, education, investments, and businesses. At CFED, we also define assets as access to quality financial services, financial education and financial savvy, good credit, and social capital. So assets are powerful things. They move families beyond a paycheck-to-paycheck existence. They create financial buffers that allow them to weather emergencies, and they enhance the well-being and life chances of children and are linked to lower rates of divorce and domestic violence. So here are just a few of the findings from recent research about the power of assets, and I'm barely skimming the surface here. We can point you towards more studies. I'll mention if you're interested in learning more. First, when we think about upward mobility, income is less important than assets. 71% of children born to low-income but high-saving parents move up from the bottom income quartile over a generation, compared to only 50% of children of low-saving, low-income parents. Second, marriage helps to build wealth and stability, but evidence suggests that stability and wealth also helps increase marriage. Even small amounts of wealth can have significant impact on closing the marriage gap between African American and white males. And wealth plays an important role in predicting first marriage, especially for men, but also for women. There's also some interesting nuggets in the research finding, including that vehicle ownership increases your odds of first marriage by 57%, and financial assets increase odds of first marriage by 36%. Third, assets can have both economic and aspirational impacts on college attendance and completion. Among youth who expect to go to college, those who have an account in their own name are 4 to 6 times more likely to attend college than youth without an account. One of the most important measures we use to understand the financial positions of households is asset poverty. No matter how you measure it, poverty in America is increasing. In 2011, the country saw the poverty rate rise to the highest level in nearly 2 decades. 14% of households now live in poverty. However, the official poverty rate highlights just one aspect of household finances, namely the percentage of people with insufficient income to cover their day-to-day expenses. It does not account for the resources, the money they have in the bank, or assets such as home or a car a family has to meet emergencies or longer-term needs. By this measure, substantially more people in the U.S. today are facing a future of limited hope for long-term financial security. According to the CFED Assets and Opportunities Scorecard, 27% of households, nearly double the percentage that are income poor, are living in what we call asset poverty. These families do not have the savings or other assets to cover basic expenses for 3 months if a layoff or other emergency leads to a loss of income. And since the release of the last scorecard in 2009, the number of asset-poor families has increased by 21%, from 1 in 5 families to 1 in 4 families. For the first time, the scorecard also includes a measure of what we call liquid asset poverty, which excludes assets such as a home, business, or car that can't easily be converted to cash, and consequently provides a more realistic picture of the resources families have to meet emergency needs. According to that measure, 43% of households in the United States, equivalent to 127.5 million people nationwide, are liquid asset poor, with little or no savings to fall back on in an emergency. Obviously, this is an incredibly shocking statistic. The story is also particularly disturbing for households of color, who are more than twice as likely as white households to be asset poor, 44% compared with 20% respectively. And a shockingly high proportion of households of color are liquid asset poor, 65% compared with 34% of white households. So with those statistics in mind, I'd like to hand it off at this point to Lee Tivell and Michael Mira, who will dig deeper into these challenges and talk about some of the solutions that can be incorporated into existing housing programs and systems. Lee, the mic's yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Rick. And so Michael and I are going to kind of tag team through this second part of the presentation today, which is really going to begin to focus on what we can do with this information about assets and how you can begin to think about embedding assets into your work as housing providers. You know, Rick has given us here a really powerful sense of why assets matter and the stunning number of Americans who live in asset poverty. There's a huge gap there. And so the question is, how do we bridge that gap and how do we even start to think about it? Well, one way that we think about it here at CFED is with something that we call our Household Financial Security Framework. This to us is a way to kind of encapsulate all the different kinds of asset building strategies, and we'll get into those in more detail in a minute, that make up comprehensive household financial security. So we see this as a 5-step process with a lot of kind of back and forth and flow in between the steps. So the first is learning financial education and other financial related knowledge, earning an income, saving for the future, investing in long-term assets, and all the way through protecting the gains that families are making along the way. So what does that really mean, though? Well, in the next slide here, we're going to get a little bit more specific and give you some examples of tools that fit into that financial security framework. So these are the kinds of specific things that you could think about implementing in the housing space. A little later on, Michael and I are going to highlight a few examples from this list and go into them in more depth. We won't be able to go through them all, but want to just kind of give you an introduction to give you a sense of what your options are for bringing this piece of the puzzle to the communities that you serve. So again, using those 5 categories that I just showed on the previous slide, learn, earn, save, invest, and protect, on the right you'll see examples of each of those. So learning is really about giving families the ability to make informed decisions about their financial lives. I will say, though, that financial education is not as powerful, though, as giving families financial education paired with an opportunity to practice what they're learning. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Under the earning category, the goal here is maximizing income. So that might happen through receipt of the earned income tax credit or other tax credits. It might be through accessing all the public benefits to which a family is entitled. The strategies here are important on their own, but perhaps even more important, these are really value adds to the essential strategies of workforce development and skill development and education. In the saving category, here we're talking about creating access to affordable, consumer-friendly financial services, checking and savings accounts, affordable credit, loans, direct deposit, and removing asset limits that discourage families who receive public benefits from saving. Investing, here we're talking about using those savings that have been built and also accessing other programs to acquire things like financial assets, so retirement accounts or investment accounts, helping people buy homes, start or expand businesses, and get education or training, all to build wealth and create additional income over time. And then finally, in the protect category, this is all about making sure that hardworking families can hang on to the assets that they have, that they aren't preyed on by abusive lenders, that they have the help they need to avoid foreclosure, and that they have insurance to protect them from life's emergencies. So in a minute, we're going to go through some of these examples in more detail. But first, I want to turn it over to Michael Mira of the Tacoma Housing Authority to offer his perspective on why all of this should matter if you are a housing authority or other housing provider. And I should say, you know, we asked Michael to join us on this webinar because the Tacoma Housing Authority is a real leader and pioneer in this space. And so Michael has very rich experience in this area. So Michael, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lee. We find the first step for an organization, especially a houser, in asset building activity is to decide how important it is to the organizational mission. And you are more likely to be successful in this if your mission statement and your strategic objectives include asset building. And if your organization takes those statements carefully, everything is downstream from there. And the next step as an organization downstream from stating it as an important part of your mission is to include it in the performance measures you use as an organization to find out if what you are doing is working. THA, for example, has adopted strategic directives that tell us that our job is not only to house people, but to help them succeed as parents, students, wage earners, and savers. And this is part of our view on what we want to accomplish with the families we house. We want them to come to us and prosper, and for their time with us to be transforming and temporary. And we count asset building as a necessary part of that transformation. For those housers who are also Hope 6 or choice neighborhood developers, or in other ways are building or developing real estate on any scale, it is a good chance to ask yourself how asset building fits within that development. We think that place-based asset building programs have some advantages. It's part of our general view of services that they are more likely to be successful if they are focused on a community that identifies itself in positive ways and that become part of the visible walking landscape. We're learning this at our community of Salishan, which is about a 200-acre urban neighborhood that we have torn down and rebuilt, and find that it is an excellent occasion to build asset building activities into the redevelopment. Let me give you some examples. It really started before we tore anything down and before we moved anybody out with our effort to find out how many of the families who lived there were interested in home ownership. And several years before we asked anyone to move, we went through the entire population asking families questions to determine if they wanted to be a homeowner and if they could be made ready for home ownership. And through an array of activities from THA and many partners, by the time we moved people out, we had identified those who wanted to own and who could be made fit to own. And we moved 855 families out, and as a result of our homeownership efforts, 100 of them moved directly into a home they purchased. We counted that as a big success, and done right, those purchases can be transforming activities for not only the present generation, but subsequent generations in that family. A second example is the programming for our commercial core, which will include a credit union. We count this as an important step for asset building for that community because having that part of the visible walking landscape makes it more likely that people will use it. Lee mentioned that we don't really have a good sense of how many of a public housing population is banked or unbanked. At THA, we don't have a precise sense either, but we know that when people pay their rent, half of them send us money orders. And that might denote an extent of the unbanked portion of our population. With a credit union on site, it will make it easier for people to start using mainstream financial tools like a checking account. The third example I'll talk about a little bit later at greater length, but at Salishan, with CFED's help, we are planning something we call Children's Match Savings Accounts. The goal is to work it so that every child born into Salishan or who moves into Salishan will start with a balance in a match savings account in that credit union. We like this idea for a variety of reasons that Lee will be describing related to the advantage of children's match savings account. But for purposes of a real estate developer, we like it that it's on site so that the children, when they walk to school, will walk past their bank, think of their money in there, and make it more likely that they'll take it seriously. Thank you, Lee.
That's great. Thank you so much, Michael. And so I'll turn to Michael to elaborate perhaps a little bit more if there are other pieces that you want to share about some of those projects and others as we get into some specific examples of the kinds of what we believe, as Michael said, are transforming asset building strategies that I mentioned earlier. So for each one of these examples that we're about to share, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the strategy itself, share some ideas for first steps that you can consider taking if you're interested in implementing the strategy in your community. And then, again, in a few cases, Michael will give you some firsthand examples of how we've approached or how they've approached some of these strategies at the Tacoma Housing Authority. So first up is financial education and credit repair. This is a really fundamental piece. As you recall from the financial security pathway that I showed you earlier, LEARN was the first step on that pathway. And that's what this is really about here. You know, I do want to note that in addition to basic financial education, sometimes more intensive help is needed. Those of us in the housing space know all too well what an enormous barrier bad credit or no credit can be, certainly to accessing housing, but also to getting a job, getting good rates on loans and cell phones and utilities, you know, and moving people toward readiness for home ownership. And as I mentioned earlier, we think financial education is extremely important. Again, it is the building block for lots of these other asset building tools, but we also believe that financial education on its own is not as powerful as when it is paired with other asset building strategies like having a savings account or other tools that allow people to practice what they're learning in the real world. So if you're interested in providing financial education to residents of your housing communities, how do you do that? How do you get started? Well, the truth is that there are a lot of existing financial education providers and curricula out there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And in fact, local housing staff don't have to be the ones to do the training, although that would certainly be very powerful. Instead, you can look to identify and connect with existing providers of quality financial education in your area and develop partnerships. Perhaps they can come and either deliver financial ed directly to groups of residents or provide train-the-trainer sessions. Perhaps there's a referral network that can be launched. And often, and this is true not just in the housing space, but in Head Start and child care and many other kinds of programs that we are looking to embed assets in, often the staff of these programs are just as interested in these resources as the residents. So that's something else to consider. The next step, next example I'd like to share kind of moves us into the banking space. As we talked about earlier, we have a large number of households nationally that are unbanked. Some families have trouble getting banked because of past financial mistakes or bad experiences. Others just feel like the other options, like check cashers, are just easier, or there may not be a financial institution, a bank or a credit union nearby that's convenient. But the truth is, if we're trying to help move folks into the financial mainstream, it's hard to do that if a family is saving their money in a coffee can. And so we really need to get folks, you know, into that formal financial sector. It doesn't help that there is so-called high cost of being poor. I'm spending more for my financial services than if I were at a traditional bank or a credit union. And the other reason to look at giving folks an account and getting families banked is that by having even a simple account with a modest amount in it, it begins to give families a place to practice what they're learning in financial education and to create a modest cushion for emergencies. So one great way to get started in this area is to connect with savings initiatives like Bank On or similar projects. Bank On initiatives are coalitions of local governments, financial institutions, so banks or credit unions, and community groups that offer unbanked households low cost or in many cases free bank accounts and access to financial education. They also offer second chance accounts for those with a past history that may prevent them from getting a traditional account. So as you see here, there are dozens of Bank On initiatives either emerging or already underway. And a great place to start is to check out the Bank On website at joinbankon.org to see if there's a Bank On near you. If there is not a Bank On initiative in your area, you could certainly explore the America Saves initiative or similar programs in your area. Michael, you already mentioned the fact that you're bringing a credit union to Salishan and the reason that was important. Is there anything else that you want to add to that here?
Well, we count the credit union as an important source of some of the financial instruction you are describing, as well as a chance to practice what people will learn from that instruction by opening up accounts and using their other services. The credit union will also be the pivot organization for the children's match savings accounts, and it's a good match to some of our other asset building activities that happen at Salishan. For instance, our annual VITA site has been very successful year to year in getting people to file their applications in ways that are advantageous to them, getting their tax refunds and their earned income tax credits. And to do that in close proximity to a credit union is a good chance to get people into banking.
And I couldn't have asked for a better segue, Michael, so thank you, into the next strategy that we wanted to share, actually, which is making the most of tax time. As Michael just alluded to, tax time is a really critical opportunity. It's a savings and asset building moment for families. And it's an important chance to move families toward financial security. You know, for many households, it's the one time a year that a big check is coming in the door. And so there's this great opportunity to help families think about, how do we want to spend this? Do we want to save part of it? And are we getting everything that we are entitled to? So it's critically important at tax time to help low and moderate income households access free tax preparation services, which help them avoid spending money on those higher cost services, and to ensure that families are accessing the earned income tax credit and other tax credits, which can essentially increase the amount of their take-home pay. And finally, we can help tax filers save by giving them an opportunity to partner with a financial institution to help them open accounts right there at the tax prep center. And now the IRS is actually making it even easier to save by implementing split refunds, which allow taxpayers to send their refund to multiple accounts and also to buy savings bonds for themselves or others. So this is a really powerful tool. If you're interested in doing this in your community, again, you don't have to start from scratch. Chances are good that there is a local free tax prep site in your community, either volunteer income tax assistance or VITA or tax counseling for the elderly that you could connect with, again, either as a referral partnership or to host tax prep sites right there in your housing communities, and certainly to provide information about tax prep to residents. There's a list of the VITA sites and the TCE sites on the IRS website, and this again is something that I think program staff may also have a real interest in. And it's something that Tacoma Housing Authority has been involved in for a while now. So Michael, do you want to talk about what the experience has been like there with your VITA sites?
Yeah, we do this every year at Salishan for the larger community beyond Salishan. And give you some examples. In 2012, we prepared or helped people prepare 171 tax returns and file them. Refunds totaled about $250,000. Total earned income tax credit dollar amount was about $125,000. The average income of the VITA participants was only $21,000. Their average earned income tax credit was about $2,000, and their average refund was about $2,600. Lee is exactly right. These are the chance during the year for people to reflect on what to do with money they've got in their pocket. And if there's a credit union at their elbow offering them a chance to get into banking, it's the one moment when you're likely to get them to give it a try.
Yeah, that's great. And those are, Michael, you shared some really powerful numbers in terms of, you know, the incomes of families that are being served and the amount that's coming back into their pockets, which is huge. And I think, you know, perhaps this concept of tax time and helping families get, you know, what they're entitled to, what they've earned, and then thinking about saving and making some financial decisions that are informed ones. I mean, that's a great example of the way that we see these asset building strategies all kind of working together. It's why we had that flow chart earlier that sort of showed how they're all linked together and part of a process. So tax time, perhaps more than any other example, I think highlights that just beautifully. I do want to remind folks who are on the phone or who may have joined a little bit late that if you have questions for any of us who are on this call, that you can submit them at any point through the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. So feel free to send those in if you do have questions. Because we have a lot of folks on the line, we've muted the line, so you can't just shout them out. But wanted to make sure that you knew to submit those questions if you had them. Okay. So the fourth area that we'd like to highlight in terms of a specific strategy are individual development accounts, or IDAs. And this is a tool that is near and dear to my heart as a former IDA practitioner. IDAs are asset building savings accounts. They are matched savings accounts used for homeownership, business, startup or expansion, or post-secondary education or training. So a participant who opens an IDA, it's really just like any other savings account, except that the savings in that account are matched and that the account can only be used for one of those approved asset purposes. The matches for the participant savings come from a blend, typically, of both public and private sources. And while the match rates vary, typically what we see is something in the 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 range, although we've certainly seen lower and higher match rates. But 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 typically makes sense. And folks typically save over about a 5-year period and then purchase that asset. Now here again, we're not just sort of handing an individual an account and saying, okay, go to it. We're embedding financial education into every IDA program because, and in many cases, both general financial education and also asset-specific financial education. So, for example, if an individual is interested in saving for homeownership, there'd be a homeownership education and counseling course that they might complete. Now, one important resource that we want to be sure to mention is the Assets for Independence program. AFI, as we affectionately call it, is the federal IDA program that was launched 12 years ago now. It's the largest source of IDA funding in the country. There's about usually around $24, $25 million available per year in appropriations. Now, applying for AFI funds does require the applicant to provide a dollar-for-dollar non-federal match. So if I want to apply for $100,000 in AFI funds, I will need to bring $100,000 in non-federal match to the table. That can be foundation dollars. It can be from states or cities or municipalities. It can be from almost any source other than federal funds. The one exception is that CDBG dollars can be counted as non-federal match in this case. They're the only source of funds that can be. So since the AFI program launched those 12 years ago, we now are at about, we've had about 400 projects nationwide. We've had many, many tens of thousands of savers who have saved an extraordinary amount of money. I think it's notable who the users of these accounts typically are, often women. And for many families, the IDA is the first savings account that they have. In terms of starting points, if this is something that is of interest to you, how do you go about doing it? Well, there are a couple ways that you could do this. First, if you're not interested in running a program yourself, you could connect with another existing local IDA provider and refer clients over to that IDA provider. And even create more formal partnerships. Perhaps that provider might be willing to hold a couple of spaces for residents of your housing communities. The other option is to identify prospective new AFI applicants, and that might be those of you on the phone actually, and to check out the AFI Resource Center for more information at idaresources.org. idaresources.org is also a great place to check and see if there is another AFI program that already exists in your community. So certainly there are a number of housing authorities and housing providers that are AFI grantees, and AFI is always looking for good new grantees to apply. One of those excellent housing authority grantees, just coincidentally, believe it or not, happens to be the Tacoma Housing Authority. So Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about why THA got into the IDA space and what that's meant?
We have three kinds of experiences with IDAs. All of them are quite positive, wanting us to do more. Let me mention the first one. We used IDAs as an important part of the homeownership success I was describing. We had IDA accounts that help people save for their down payment. And that was a very encouraging experience with IDAs. We have adult IDAs that go beyond home ownership, and a subset of that I should mention would be familiar to any public housing authorities on the line, which is a family self-sufficiency program that allows families to save by not paying an increased amount of their share of rent that would normally be due when they increase their earned income. Instead, that increase goes into essentially a forced savings account that we've found very valuable. And then we've had a limited experience with IDAs for teenagers who are aging out of foster care. And that was our really first foray into IDAs for youth. And our success there was positive enough to make us want to learn more about it. And we want to extend it to children of any age, and we will start with Salishan, as I mentioned.
Great. Thank you, Michael. It's so helpful to have you here on the call to kind of talk about the real-world experience of a housing authority and using a number of these asset-building tools. And again, you've positioned us perfectly, so thank you, to talk about the last of the examples that we wanted to share on today's call. And this is more of an emerging practice, and this is around children's savings accounts. We've actually gotten a couple of questions about that already, which we'll get to in a bit. The premise of children's savings accounts, at least in the way that CFED thinks about them, is this. I think we've established very clearly that asset building is important for adults. So the big question is, what would happen if asset building opportunities started earlier in life with an account seeded with an initial deposit? And the other deposits that children and families made could be matched like an IDA, and financial education could be provided. So we began to think about that about 10 years ago and thought, this is an idea that bears exploration. One of the things we found is that families we were working with in other programs, like IDA programs, first of all, the adults were saying, well, I wish I'd had this earlier. I might have made some different decisions. I might have had some different opportunities. And also we began to see that the children in families of IDA savers were beginning to emulate their parents. So we tested this idea, which again is not just a nice idea, is already happening. The first large test of children's savings accounts began not quite 10 years ago. We worked with more than 1,200 account holders in 12 communities across the country, and over about 3.5 years, these low-income families and their children accumulated a total of almost $1.8 million with an average account balance of more than $1,500. But perhaps more important, or as important or even more important than the financial assets in the account, the research on children's savings has begun to indicate, and Rick alluded to this earlier, that there is an asset effect, an aspirational shift that owning an account has on children and their families in terms of the way that they perceive what's possible for themselves and their futures. As Rick mentioned earlier, there's one really powerful study that shows that among children who expect to go to college, those with a savings account dedicated for college are 4 times more likely to actually get there and stay there than their peers. And if the account is in the child's own name, they're 6 times more likely to get to college and stay there. So there's some very powerful and really growing body of evidence that indicates that this asset effect may be just as powerful as the account itself. So this is a field that is now growing fast. The CFED initiative laid the groundwork and proof of concept for children's accounts. Now we are taking this notion of children's accounts to scale. It is work that we here at CFED are deeply engaged in and are eager to see move forward. We are right now engaged in a number of new children's savings initiatives in many communities around the country in various stages of development. And one of the most exciting spaces that we are in is around the developing partnerships that are coming up with housing authorities like Tacoma and other housing stakeholders. We see housing as a critically important platform for a range of asset building strategies, but children's accounts especially. So if this is something that you're interested in exploring for your community, we'd certainly be happy to chat with you about that. Michael, would you like to say anything more about the vision for the Salishan project and your education work?
Yeah. The definition of asset building that Lee mentioned in the beginning includes educational assets. And we think that is exactly right. And for that reason, THA is now in the 3rd year of something we call the Education Project. It has 2 goals: to increase the school outcomes of the children we house, to improve the outcomes of the schools that serve our properties. And we do this for 3 reasons. One is we think education is an important part of the transformation that I explained to be part of our mission that we seek in the families we serve. The second reason is we are real estate developers, and the success of the developments that we build and finance depends upon the ability of those properties to attract people to move into them, especially homeowners. And that depends to a considerable extent on people's confidence in the schools that serve those communities. The third reason we are doing this is because in Tacoma, as in most places, the school district is not getting it done. They need help, and we mean to find out what our role is as interested community members. There are many parts to our education project, and you can read about them on our website. If I may add another word about children's savings accounts and their role at a community like Salishan. And this is a word for Hope 6 and Choice neighborhood developers who will be developing these mixed income communities of a wide range of incomes and homeowners and renters. In those communities, the main community tension will always be between the homeowners and the renters. And you should be alert for ways to knit that community together across those lines. We count children's savings accounts, which will be available to children of all families, homeowners and renters, as one of the ways to help that community understand itself as one neighborhood, not two.
That's a great point. Thank you, Michael, for raising that up. So this takes us really to the end of some of the presentation portion. I do want to just add quickly that there's a wealth of other information out there for you to get started. These are just a few resources. There's certainly more out there. If you have other questions, all of our contact information will be shared at the end of this PowerPoint, and we will send this presentation to you after the webinar. So in a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Rick and to Mindy to kind of facilitate the Q&A portion. And so again, if you have questions, please submit those through your questions box. But to facilitate the Q&A portion of the webinar, we'd like to ask you to take part in a very quick Instapoll, which we're going to launch right now. So this should be appearing on your screen. So we want to get a sense of your reaction to all this. What is your sense of how doable this is for you as a housing provider to take on, or housing authority or other housing stakeholder? In general, do these strategies seem really hard to implement, somewhat easy to implement, or are you already doing this work and so this isn't a problem for you? So we're going to take about 10 seconds to allow folks to vote. And then we will share the results. So go ahead and make sure you vote now. Okay, we're going to close the poll and share it with you. There we go. So looks like, okay, so looks like a mix. Perhaps not surprisingly. The good news is that almost half of you think that these would be somewhat easy to implement, which is heartening. And I think the good news is that there's a wealth of, no pun intended, a wealth of experience and knowledge and information out there for you. So if you're interested in a particular area, there are tools and resources that we can point you toward, and that I know HUD is eager to point you toward as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rick.
Great. Thanks a lot, Lee and Michael. That was a lot of really great information. I'd like to hand the mic for a minute to Mindy Turbov, HUD's Director of Choice Neighborhoods, to say a few words about what we've just heard and some thoughts on integrating asset building into Choice and Hope 6 neighborhoods. Welcome, Mindy.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon in almost all the time zones. And I would like to thank the Corporation for Enterprise Development and the Tacoma Housing Authority, particularly Michael, for providing all this really valuable information. Just a few words on Choice. As you know, Choice is sort of the next iteration of Hope 6, and a lot of its basis is founded in the lessons learned from Hope 6. And I think that the Tacoma Housing Authority's experience with Hope 6 is just another example of that, with not an easy one, I don't mean to take that lightly, of innovative ways of working with communities, both within housing, public housing, and in the larger surrounding communities. Just a few things about Choice Neighborhoods. While it's primarily been focused on public housing, I just want to remind everybody that this is also available for other assisted housing within the within the FHA world, 202s, 221s, 236s. So we're looking at a broader range of housing developments. And as I said, many of the things that are taking place in Choice are outgrowths of Hope 6. The difference, I think, is that Choice spells them out a little more specifically, and those three things are housing, people, and neighborhoods. For any of you who've read the NOFAs, you are probably sick of having that pounded into your head, but it is housing, people, and neighborhoods. And so I think that asset building is really critical in all of these. And I just want to share with you a few places that we are aware of in the new Choice neighborhoods that have been funded recently. We know that in the planning grants, there are quite a few partnerships emerging. And I would encourage anyone who has a planning grant now to really look for partners that can help with many of these learning, earning, savings, investing, and protecting, because it's really critical for families to learn financial education. I think we all know that. We've seen the problems that people have when they really don't have a savings account, don't know how to go into bank, are frightened by financial institutions, and subsequently have to go to payday lenders, etc. Earning, what we have learned and what we see in our Choice implementation grants is that nearly all of them are looking at these kinds of activities, and we got some spectacular numbers from their partners of how much savings they have in returning funds from earned income tax credit. It's really, really one of the most critical ways for low-income people to earn cash and then have an opportunity to save it. There are a number of our choice recipients who are also working on IDA strategies, and we think, of course, that when you could get matching money and begin to learn the familiarity with savings and financial institutions, it's really critical. I particularly like what Tacoma is doing with actually getting a credit union in the neighborhood. I think that's a really exciting opportunity, and in choice neighborhoods we do provide 15% of the funds can be used for economic development activities, and I think a credit union coming into a commercial area, it would be considered one of those sorts of activities. And of course, we know that protecting your investments, i.e. keeping away from predatory lenders, payday lenders, and having ready sources of lower cost checking accounts and lower fee savings accounts are really critical. So I want to thank you all. I think there's real opportunities here. I would encourage all of you who have planning grants to seek out these resources so that we can get some really great partnerships going with the choice neighborhoods and continuing them with the Hope 6. Thanks.
Yeah, and let me jump in here if I may. This is Ron Ashford. I apologize for not being here in the beginning. This whole area of asset building, I think, is critically important if we expect our neighborhoods and our grants to prosper and our families to prosper. So we had some discussions with AFI earlier on, so that if you are a housing authority, a Hope 6 housing authority, or a Choice Neighborhoods housing authority, and you want to connect with AFI, you can go first to the website. We will do anything we can to facilitate that arrangement. So we can talk to the AFI office here, and together we can see what we can do. We want to be a resource to you, again, because we recognize that this is so important. And this information that we just got over the last hour is like awesome. So I want to thank CFED as well. And then maybe we can just go to the questions. Or back to Lee.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Ron. Thanks, Mindy. Thanks to all the panelists for their presentations today. A reminder that today's webinar has been recorded and will be posted on both the CFED and the HUD website. In addition, we're going to email the PowerPoint out to all attendees. So we have a few questions here, and I think we have about 8 minutes or so. The first question has come in for Lee, and it's, are parents able to access the money saved in a children's savings account?
It's a great question. Typically, the way that we like to structure them, the answer is no. Because these are kids, they're minors, they can't open an account on their own. So there has to be some other custodian on the account. And in the children's savings account programs that we're involved in, we typically prefer that adult or other entity, that other custodian, not be the parent. For that very reason, in part, so that we can make sure that the savings in the account stay there for their intended purpose, which is typically education. The other reason that we like to have a third-party custodian, and this could be, it could be a housing authority, it could be a not-for-profit, it could be a city or a school system or a church. The other reason that we like having a third party as the custodian is that we don't want to put families at risk of losing other public benefits for which they may qualify, because children's accounts are typically not exempt from asset tests. So if there is a third-party owner of the account who owns that account for the benefit of the child, it allows us to exclude that account from being accessible. It's not deemed accessible to the family for asset limit purposes. And so we don't, sort of put families at risk of this very perverse, disincentive right here of if I save for my child's college, I might lose other benefits. So, so the answer is the way that we like to see accounts set up with a third-party custodian. No, it is not accessible to either the child or the parent except for an approved withdrawal.
Great. Thanks a lot, Lee. Next question is for Michael. Michael, did you have to hire additional staff in order to implement these asset building strategies, or have you partnered with other organizations?
Both. We have staff dedicated to the purpose, and we partner with other organizations.
So that second question, or the third question here, is for Michael as well. Michael, how long did it take to get a participant's credit score to 620 or better to purchase a home?
Oh dear, I do not know how long it took, except we started 2 years before we asked anyone to move. And with the help of partners, in particular, the Washington State Housing Finance Commission provided an array of support, including what we colloquially call home ownership boot camp. How to shop for a mortgage, how to shop for a house, how to own a house, how to clean up your credit, how to save for a down payment. And not everybody made it, but enough made it to produce the results I mentioned, and we counted that as a big success. And that was before the mortgage foreclosure crisis. When the mortgage foreclosure crisis happened, we wondered how those families did. So we went back and checked on them in an informal survey and learned some revealing things, that while Tacoma and Salishan as well had their share of foreclosures, Salishan did not have more than its share, and of the families who went through our home ownership program, there wasn't a single foreclosure, which taught us the value of mentoring when you shop for a mortgage.
Okay, another one for you, Michael, real quick. How did you message your IDAs to your target audience?
I think it's an element of our case management with individual families. It's a tool in the case management toolkit. They learn about it there. If it's tied to a particular program, like our program for youth aging out of foster care, it's something that's front and center for youth who sign up. And for the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, that is a program that where we seek out families who we think would be good fits.
Okay, I think this will probably be our last question. It's about 28 after the hour. And this, Ron, if you're still on the line, this might be for you. It's what are the best ways to incorporate IDA accounts with active FSS programs and escrows?
So here is an issue. The question was basically how to match AFI and FSS. Am I correct?
That's right.
So I don't believe that they can be matched, right? It's going to have to be separate. And FSS can do some things that AFI can't do and vice versa. So I think that if a person is going to have an account and they want to do home ownership, at the same time they want to go to education, they want to start a business, their best bet is to have two separate accounts, because the FSS escrow cannot be matched in a AFI IDA. So both accounts are going to help you get to your goals quicker, but again, unfortunately, they can't be combined.
Great, thanks a lot. I think that'll do it. It's 30 minutes after the hour. Thanks to all of our panelists today. And again, a reminder that the recorded webinar will be available on the CFED and the HUD websites. And we will be back in touch with the PowerPoint, as long as an additional follow-up survey to gather your thoughts and ideas. So thanks a lot and have a great day.